What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode. Let me ask you a question to start out. What makes a story feel finished? What is it about a tale wrapping up that makes us go, there it is? For us Westerners, that has almost exclusively been the 3-act structure. We establish characters and their desires. We show that there are antagonists and obstacles to those desires. But then, almost without fail, at the end of the story, the hero ultimately triumphs by transforming into whatever they needed to be to overcome those obstacles. The 3-act structure is inherently bound to the idea of desire, conflict, and overcoming the conflicts to achieve your desire. A movie only feels complete if the bad guy is dead, or the hero gets the girl, or whatever combination of desire, conflict, overcoming conflict transpires. One of the only exceptions in modern Hollywood is if it's a trilogy, and so we're okay with parts 1 and 2 not quite giving us the satisfaction we desire because we know it's coming with part 3. When a story doesn't end with some triumph or some valuable lesson learned, we in the West oftentimes feel discomfort, like we were just robbed of the time we spent watching or reading the story. What was the point? There was no real resolution, or that was dumb, we might say. But what if it's not the story that's broken, but the lens that we view it through? Because the truth is, there is an art of storytelling that is thousands of years old that simply doesn't play by those rules. And the more you notice it around you, the more you see that stories can be valuable in all sorts of formats that you have never considered before. Do I have your attention? Let's get started. Today, we're going to be examining what is commonly known in English as the 4-act story structure. But this structure, which is attributed to Japanese culture and exists in an even older form in Chinese poetry, is known by its Japanese term, Kishōtenketsu. That is actually 4 words, which, when we break them down, name the 4 different acts, essentially. Ki is the introduction of the main elements. Shō is the development of those same elements, so the story continuing as we expect it to. And then comes the ten, the twist. There are new elements that we did not see coming, but this is so much more than just saying it's a plot twist like we see in a mystery story. But we'll get to that in a little bit. And then the 4th act, ketsu, means all of the elements, the old and the new, finding some sort of harmony or resolution. So there's intro, development, twist, and then harmonizing of elements. And I'm kind of leaning into the term harmony and avoiding resolution because in Western storytelling, the word resolution is so charged with the concept of a satisfying end, but this is broader than that. Now, we could go really deep into just this next thing I'm going to say, but I'm just going to go as briefly as I can to make sense of what we need to discuss, which is the difference between Western and Eastern thought in general. Now, Western thought, which as we know is largely based on origins from Greek civilization in terms of our ethics and frameworks, is different from Eastern thought, which is rooted strongly in influences like Taoism, Buddhism, etc. And it's that Western thought leans heavily into individualism and personal glory. Our ability to prosper and achieve compared to our fellow man is a mark of our strength, our wisdom, and character. That is why our stories push towards a hero figure who overcomes great obstacles to achieve their objectives. Eastern thought, in the most oversimplified way, I don't profess to be some expert in it, but it's about how each individual is simply one manifestation of the universe. The whole is to be valued over the individual. In fact, the most heroic figures in many Eastern stories are the ones who sacrifice themselves for the whole. Mulan is the story of a daughter who takes her aging father's place in the army, sacrificing her own identity to spare his life. And then, when she is offered high rank in the military because of her amazing performance, she turns it down to go back home and take care of her parents. And in cultures like feudal Japan, the greater whole might not even be one specific group of people, but a more abstract concept like honor. 47 Ronin is a great example of that. After their lord was forced into ritual suicide over a court conflict that was provoked by a corrupt official who didn't get punished, 47 samurai spend 2 years patiently plotting revenge, abandoning their families and dignity to hide their intentions, so that they could then kill this official and get justice for their lord. But then they immediately turned themselves in and committed ritual suicide together because honor required them to fulfill their duty and submit to the law that had forbidden the murder they'd just committed. They essentially sacrificed their lives twice, once for loyalty and once for honor. That in itself is a whole different episode of the show. The difference between Western personal glory and Eastern collectivism. But I only bring that up today because it does kind of explain how something like the 4-act structure found a home in civilizations like these. Because the ultimate goal of most of these stories is not to motivate you to go out and slay dragons. It's to recognize that you are one thread in the tapestry of existence. And that comes with a lot of chaos. The best thing you can do is bear your burdens proudly because you are connected to everything. Now, I understand to some of you that is just a hard concept to wrap your head around, and it may feel easier to just dismiss it as being silly. But sit with it for a bit as I keep going. I read a book about Eastern storytelling called Spring, Summer, Asteroid, Bird, The Art of Eastern Storytelling by Henry Lien. It was a great read for helping my Western brain unravel the purpose and beauty of Kishōtenketsu. One thing he did in early chapters, just to show how storytelling is not storytelling across the globe, was retell the premise of some iconic Western stories, but tell it through the lens that a traditional Chinese adult might view them. The difference is being largely this collective versus individualist perspective, as well as the deeply baked in judgment about how well children marry off or end up professionally. I'll share a couple that he put in the book, and then I had some fun coming up with a few of my own for stories we've covered on the show. So I'll read the interpretation of the premise first, pause to give you a chance to guess at what it is, and then I'll tell you the name of the story. Ready? Okay, number 1. Majestic gold dragon is murdered by a band of thieves and homeless men. Got it? Yeah, that one might be the easiest. It's The Hobbit, because in traditional Chinese culture, dragons are not fearsome monsters that are noble to kill. They are majestic, divine beings that are viewed as sacred. Killing one would be a pretty big sin. And then the idea of calling the dwarves homeless men made me laugh. Okay, ready for the next one? One daughter marries the richest boy in her village. 2 marry paupers. The 4th ends up dead. Okay, do we have an idea for this one? This is a possible way that an Eastern viewer might perceive Little Women. You can see how in this viewpoint, the personal desires of the characters don't matter. It was all about the futures they procured for themselves. Okay, now a couple that I've come up with from books that we've covered on this show. Ready for the next one? A promising young man ends up getting his entire family killed because he was too indecisive. Did you get that one? Indecisive may have been the word that gave it away, but we're talking about Hamlet, of course. Okay, just a couple more. A man creates life before he is ready to be a father, then spends the rest of his life being confronted by his scorned child. Of course, that was Frankenstein. And lastly, a man too lazy to get a job ends up becoming a criminal despite the shame his own arrogance has brought upon his family. That sounds quite a lot like Raskolnikov, doesn't it? So that exercise is just to show us how the culture you grow up in can alter how you perceive the same events of the story. But I'll admit, sharing these was indulgent because they don't have as much to do with Kishōtenketsu. So back to understanding the 4-act structure. And we're going to go through a Japanese myth that exemplifies this very soon. So there is an actual story element to this episode. But before we start the story, a few more details on what is so unique about this story structure. I already said that the twist and harmonizing is less about closure in the sense of winning and more about acceptance. In the book, Henry Lien put it this way, quote, "The 4-act structure is more interested in exploring the unseen relationships among the story's elements than in pitting them against each other until one remains. It's more observational. It's more philosophical. It's less about trying to dominate the things that are into what you want them to be, and more about having an awareness of how the greater world or the universe is always in play in a number of different ways outside of yourself. In short, you are not the center of the universe. And if that is feeling too zen or non-protagonist for some of you, wait till I show you how it achieves this in the most violent of ways oftentimes. Because earlier I said that Act 3, the 10 of Kishōtenketsu, is not a traditional plot twist where you realize the kind church lady next door is actually the murderer. It's often the introduction of completely new elements to the story that throw the train off the rails. In Western storytelling, we cringe if the murderer ends up being a character that was only introduced with 30 minutes left in the movie because we feel cheated. But in Kishōtenketsu, half of the point is accepting that your little narrative is not contained in a tidy box inside the universe. Things will happen. Things will disrupt. Man makes plans and God laughs. You've heard that one before. And then the ketsu, the harmonizing resolution, is almost as if saying, what now? Your plans have been completely undone by the Act 3 disruption. How does this play out from here? In some ways, this feels more accurate to real life, doesn't it? And this speaks to the collectivism, universality aspect that I mentioned earlier. The idea that your little strand in the fabric of the world may have its own desire to stand out, but it will be woven into other parts of the thread to the point where you don't get to be as unique and eye-catching as you had maybe hoped. But does that mean you aren't a useful strand? Does that mean you can't be a significant strand? I don't think so. Okay, last thing I'm going to share before discussing this example from Japanese mythology. As uncommon as Kishōtenketsu is to Hollywood, it's not unheard of. In fact, in recent years, it took Hollywood by storm with a little movie called Parasite. Now, if you haven't watched it yet and claim you're going to, go ahead and skip forward a couple of minutes, but you can't be angry with me at this point. The movie is 7 years old. You only have yourself to blame. Now, the reason I want to highlight Parasite is because one of the things I find fascinating about Kishōtenketsu, it's not a requirement of the genre, but it is a mainstay of a large percentage of great 4-act stories. And it's that Act 3 doesn't just throw the plot off the rails with new elements, it changes the genre of the story entirely. It feels like you're watching or reading a different story after Act 3 hits. And Parasite nailed that. Here's a brief refresher for those who have seen it or an explanation for those who haven't. In Act 1, the key, we get introduced to a poor Korean family, the Kims, who are looking for ways to make money. Their teenage son fakes credentials as a tutor from an elite school so he can land a job tutoring a rich kid. When he discovers that the parents seem so aloof and potentially easily duped into spending large amounts of money for prestige, he convinces them that his sister is not actually his relative, but introduces her as a sought-after art therapist who can work with their youngest child who is showing behavioral issues. In Act 2, or Sho, we see how easily they are making money off of these rich people, the Park family. And so the Kim family shift from just duping to scheming. They begin to create elaborate plots to get both the chauffeur and the housemaid fired so they can place their parents in those spots instead. Now, the entire family is leeching off of this one rich family who seems to be none the wiser. And then we get to Act 3, the 10, which get ready for it if you don't know this story already. While the Park family goes on a camping trip, the Kim family essentially move into the house, living like kings and laughing about how easy it is to make money off of the Park family when there's a knock at the door. It's the fired housekeeper. She's frantic. In her panic, she reveals that her husband has been living under the house for years in a bomb shelter that the rich family isn't even aware of. And since she got fired, she has been unable to check on him or make sure he has the food and medicine he needs. The Kim family tries to shame her for her scandalous actions, but one of the kids accidentally calls the driver Dad, and now the ex-housekeeper understands their secret. A game of leveraging who has the most dirt on who ensues. It results with a tussle, some violence, and the Kim family locking the wounded ex-housekeeper and her sickly husband in the basement as the Park family has just called and said they're coming home because it's raining too much for their camping trip. So we see Acts 1 and 2 are kind of playful. It's a story of class warfare and how the less fortunate can eke out a living by fooling the people too rich to be paying attention to the details. But with the introduction of the elements in the 10, Act 3, suddenly we have a completely different story on our hands. And Act 4, the harmonizing, And now don't read into that word assuming it means peaceful or positive. It just means the elements from Acts 1, 2, and 3 now have to coexist, and we witness what happens when they're thrown together. Act 4 is really dark, and I can't do it justice in just a few lines, but know that there's plenty of violence, there's resentment between rich and poor, and in the end, really nobody got what they wanted from the situation. A lighthearted class warfare comedy turns into a grim serial killing thriller. That is Kishōtenketsu in action. Now, when Parasite came out, most Western audiences were blown away. What just happened? This is insane. I've never seen a story like this before. But to those educated in Eastern story structure, there was just a whole lot of, what? This is how we do things going on. And to be clear, I did not know about this structure back then, so I was firmly in the group of Americans who had their heads blown off by shock of what I just watched. In a good way, of course. But going back to the concept that Acts 3 and 4 just show that the universe is bigger than you and you can't control for every variable, the Kim family thought they had it solved. They were making more money than they'd ever made, all while skimming off the lifestyle of the Park family. But they could never have predicted there was an even bigger parasite already living in a bomb shelter under the house. The same way that the ex-housekeeper and her husband, who thought they'd solved their problems by hiding him in the basement, could never have predicted that the Kim family were scheming to get her fired. The 4-act structure is not claiming a 3-act structure is bad. It just has a deeper respect for the truth about the way the world works. Chaos happens. Your plot will likely be derailed. What happens next? Okay, I've given you all I can of value in explaining Kishōtenketsu. Now, let's see it in action. So to show how deeply rooted the 4-act structure is in Eastern storytelling, I've got my hands on an old Japanese myth about Urashima Taro, a young fisherman. Be on the lookout for the 4-act structure as I tell you this story. A long time ago, in a small fishing village outside of Kyoto called Mizunue, Urashima was a young man, no older than 24. He had been taught the trade by his father, but his skill was greater. He had a reputation as the best fisherman in the region. He caught more in one day than his competitors caught in a week. Urashima was known for his skill in fishing, but he was also known for his kind heart. He had been teased as a boy for not participating with the other boys when they would tease animals because he found it cruel and did not want to take part. So one evening, while he was heading home after his day of work, he found a small group of children, all laughing and screaming in delight. As he drew closer to see what was going on, he saw that the pack of devils were torturing a tortoise. Some boys were pulling on its flippers in different directions. One was smacking it on the head with a stick, while yet another was smashing a stone against its shell. Urashima tried to reason with the boys to leave the tortoise alone, but they were content to keep abusing the poor creature until Urashima offered to pay them for it. He would buy the creature from them so their efforts in catching it were not wasted. The boys' greedy little eyes lit up as he pulled out a handful of coins, and they accepted his offer. The pack of boys ran off with what surely felt like a pirate's hoard to them. After the boys were gone, Urashima knelt down and stroked the tortoise gently. "Oh, you poor thing," he said, "but you are safe now. They say that the tortoise has the longest life of any creature in this world, and yours was almost cut short by some reckless little boys. But I've saved you, and your life remains your own. I will take you back to the sea, but mind that you never wash back up on the shore again, or they may catch you once more." He waded out into the ocean and released the tortoise, who disappeared within seconds, and Urashima Taro went on his way back to his home as the last rays of light glittered off of the ocean. The next morning, he was back on his boat as usual. It was a beautiful day. The ocean was blue, the shorebirds were singing, there were big billowing clouds in the sky. He had sailed out past all the other fishing boats so he could be alone. This was too beautiful of a day to have to share with the other fishermen who were rude and couldn't appreciate beauty like this. He found himself thinking of that tortoise from the night before, because he knew the legend said tortoises could live for 10,000 years. He sighed, "I wish I could live for 10,000 years. This life is too short." He was jolted out of his daydreams at the sound of his own name. Urashima, Urashima. It was as if the wind was speaking to him. He stood up in his boat, completely alert, looking for who could have said this. But there was no one in sight. and it wasn't until he looked down into the water that he was startled once again. It was the tortoise from last night floating by his boat. "Well, Mr. Tortoise, was it you who called my name just now?" Urashima asked. He had asked the question in jest, but his jaw dropped as the tortoise began to nod its head before speaking. "Yes, it was I. Yesterday you saved my life. You are a man of great honor. I have returned to offer you my thanks and share my gratitude for your kindness towards me." "Well, this is very polite of you," Urashima said through quick breaths, still stunned that a sea creature was speaking to him. But as he regained his composure, he saw the delight of the situation. He was now friends with a tortoise. "Come into my boat, my friend. I would offer you a smoke, but I'm assuming you don't do that." The tortoise chuckled. "Sake is my favorite refreshment, but you're right. I do not partake of tobacco." "Well, I don't have any sake on board, but come on and dry your back in the sun. I know tortoises love to do that." He lifted the sea reptile into his boat, and they sat in the warm sunlight for a time before the tortoise asked, "Have you seen Ryugu, the palace of the Dragon King of the Sea?" "I confess I have lived on the sea basically my entire life, but I have never seen the Dragon King's home. It must be a wonderful place." "It truly is one of the most beautiful sights," the tortoise said. "You know, I can take you there if you would like. I can be your guide in the realm of the Sea King." Urashima tried to suppress a laugh. "I would love to go, but I'm a mortal. I don't have the ability to swim to the bottom of the ocean." "You will ride on my back," the tortoise interrupted. "Your back? But you're so small." The tortoise gives him a look that essentially says, "Trust me, bro," and then crawls off the boat, back into the water, where Urashima's eyes widened as he watched the tortoise grow to multiples of his size, to the point that Urashima would easily fit on his back. So Urashima, the grand fisherman, climbed on board and they began to descend. Now, if you're wondering why they made a big deal about him not having the strength to swim, but they seem to be ignoring the question of him having oxygen, just, it's a myth. Relax. So down, down, down the tortoise delved as the light of the sun grew dimmer and dimmer to Urashima's eyes. Through complete darkness, they dove for what felt like hours, until suddenly the fisherman saw a glowing sensation in the distance. As they approached, it came more into view, and he could tell it was a gate, a magnificent palatial gate. "Is this Ryugu Palace?" he asked. "Yes," the tortoise responded. "We are now in the realm of the Sea King." They approached, and Urashima climbed off the tortoise's back. He was now walking on the ocean floor. Again, myth, let go of your squibbles about physics. The tortoise approached the gatekeeper and introduced Urashima Taro, an honored visitor of the kingdom. The gatekeeper, who was himself a large fish, opened the gate and showed Urashima the way. Soon, masses of fishes had found their way to Urashima's presence. Flounder, scuttlefish, sole, and more all came and bowed in the presence of their guest. "Urashima-sama! Urashima-sama! Welcome to the Sea Palace, the home of the Dragon King of the Sea. Thrice welcome are you, having come from such a distant country. And you, Mr. Tortoise, we are greatly indebted to you for all your trouble in bringing Urashima here." He followed those fish that guided him through the palace. He was a poor fisherman and felt somewhat out of place here, but everyone treated him with so much respect that he didn't shy away from the attention he was getting. They reached a great entryway, and he found himself in the presence of a beautiful princess, more gorgeous than anyone he had ever seen before. She was surrounded by attendants who had come out to welcome him. The princess wore a robe of red and soft green like the underside of a wave, with golden threads glimmering throughout. Urashima was so dumbfounded at her beauty that he almost forgot how to bow. But when he did finally think to, before he could lower himself into the bowing position, the princess had grabbed him by the hand and spoke to him. "Urashima Taro, it gives me the highest pleasure to welcome you to my father's kingdom. Yesterday you set free a tortoise, and I have sent for you to thank you for saving my life, for I was that tortoise. Now, if you like, you shall live here forever in the land of eternal youth, where summer never dies and where sorrow never comes, and I will be your bride if you will, and we will live together happily forever afterwards." Urashima's head whipped around, and he realized indeed his tortoise friend had disappeared from his side. Could this possibly be? Just this morning he had wished that he could live for 10,000 years, And here he is being offered that chance, not only to live as a poor fisherman, but as the prince of the sea realm. He stood there, wordless, struck by her beauty and her offer. He eventually gets out enough words to accept the offer, to be able to stay in this beautiful place with her for eternity. Does it get any better than that? After being given fine robes of his own, there was a wedding ceremony in the presence of all of those life forms that live beneath the surface of the water. And a great feast was held in their honor. The princess, daughter of the Sea King, then walked her new husband around the palace and showed him all of the beauty. Urashima was most struck by the gardens, where somehow all 4 seasons were frozen in time. Each had its own quadrant of beauty that you could visit depending on what mood you were in. The next few days were full of non-stop delights for Urashima to get familiar with his new life and this new world. His face ached from smiling so constantly. But on the 3rd day, there was enough of a pause that he was finally hit with a realization that saddened him. His parents. He'd left them behind. They had no idea what had happened to him. And here he was going to live for lavish eternity while they would spend the rest of their short lives in a relatively poor fisherman's hut. He ached thinking of them. Quickly, he realized he could not stay here. Now, one other theme that is very strong in Eastern traditions that is weaker on the whole, but especially weak depending on your subculture within Western society, is the idea of honoring and caring for your parents, which is tantamount in Eastern culture. So, while some of you more individualist listeners might think he's crazy for giving all that up, his parents will be fine. I believe a Japanese youth hearing this story wouldn't have felt that much conflict at the notion of giving it up, because the most honorable thing you could do is sacrifice your own welfare to serve your parents. Urashima was sick from knowing his parents probably hadn't slept since he'd been down here, thinking that their son had been lost to some storm or in a fisherman's accident. So he went to his wife, the princess, and bowed low before her. I am so very happy with you, and could remain with you for eternity. You have been kinder to me than any words could describe. But I must go back home. I must return to my parents. The princess wept softly, asking if he would consider staying just one more day. But his sense of duty overwhelmed him, and he also wept as he told his love that he does not wish to leave her, but he cannot go another day without checking on his parents. Just let me go for one day and I will come back to you, he said. The princess wiped away a tear and smiled at the honor of her husband. If you must go, you will go today. I will send you with this token. She pulled out a small lacquer box tied with a silk cord that had red tassels on the ends. He received the gift with thanks and asked what was inside. That is the tamate bako, which supposedly translates to the jeweled hand box. It contains something very precious. You must never open the box. If you do, something dreadful will happen to you. Promise me you will never open it. He promised to never open it and said goodbye before rushing off. A large tortoise was provided as his transport back to the surface. As he sped off, he waved to his beloved until the palace faded into the darkness of the ocean floor. After the long journey back up, the water began to turn bluer and bluer as he reached the surface. The tortoise broke the water in the bay that Urashima had known his entire life. He smiled with relief to see his village again. But very quickly, the smile faded, because as he reached the shore, he gazed at the people around him. They were all strangers. He knew every man and woman who worked on that beach, but none of them were here. This was some foreign place. They all stared at him with equal confusion. The shore is the same, the hills are the same, but the people are different, he thought to himself. He began to trot towards his parents' home. As he reached the door, he called out, "Father, I have returned." But what he saw startled him. A heavy-set man with a distrusting look on his face came out of his father's home. But it was not Urashima's father. Did my parents move in the short time I was gone, he considered. He bowed respectfully to the strange man and said, "Until a few days ago, my family lived in this house. Do you know where they went? My name is Urashima Taro." The man's face melted from distrusting to awestruck. You are Urashima Taro?" The young fisherman nodded eagerly. "Yes, I am Urashima." The man's face broke out into a laugh. "That's a great joke," the man said. "What do you mean?" Urashima asked. I know that a man named Urashima Taro did once live in this village, but that is a story from 300 years ago. Urashima's heart sank at these words. No, don't joke with me, please, sir. I am truly Urashima, and I lived here until 4 days ago. Just tell me where my parents are. The man, seeing that Urashima was not joking, became grave. Look, I don't know who you are, he said, but the only Urashima Taro this village knows of, the greatest fisherman of his time, lived here 300 years ago. Maybe you are his spirit come to visit your old home. Why do you mock me? Urashima cried out, his despair turning to tears. It's written in the village chronicles if you don't believe me, the man said. Urashima stumbled away from the doorstep, clutching at his heart as it raced. As he looked around, it was true that everything felt a little bit off. The houses looked different, the people were all different, the clothes seemed to have changed in subtle ways. And after wandering long enough and seeing nothing that felt like home, he accepted that each day he'd spent in the Sea King's domain had been 100 years on shore. His parents were nothing but bones buried somewhere. He wandered aimlessly for a time, struggling to process these events, getting strange looks from villagers as he passed by. Hours evaporated before he truly came to terms with the reality of his situation. There is no use in staying here any longer, he thought. Time to return to my wife in the sea. But he made his way to the shore and found no tortoise was there. Hours he waited on the shore, calling out, but no guide was sent to take him back to the palace of Ryugu. He began to panic. Had he given up his wonderful life out of honor only to be robbed of everything good that he'd known? Would his wife send a guide? Was he going to be stuck here forever? In his panic, he remembered the small box she had given him, the tamate bako. She told me to never open this, he thought to himself. She said if I did, terrible things would happen to me. But I have already lost everything I had. I'm already at rock bottom. Maybe there is something inside the box that can help me. Quote, his heart consented to this act of disobedience, and he reasoned that this was the right thing to do. As he untied the silk cord and lifted the lid of the box, a small plume of purple smoke rose in 3 small wisps. They covered his face and paused there for a moment before disappearing like vapor. Urashima, who had been till that moment like a strong and handsome youth of 24, suddenly became very, very old. His back doubled up with age, his hair turned snowy white, his face wrinkled, and he fell down dead on the beach. Kind of crazy, right? How fast that turned from a traditional be kind and good things happen to you kind of story to be careful of the choices you make because there are very dark existential consequences you've never considered. The story itself had a straight up moral at the end, like a good old fashioned fairy tale. And the takeaway was, don't disobey those who are wiser than you because all sorrow begins from disobedience, or something like that. The story of Urashima switches gears really quickly in a way that makes us go, hold on, how is this the same story I was just reading that has very different vibes now? Which is why it's an incredible example of the Kishōtenketsu. If this was a Western story, he likely would have come home to his parents thinking he'd sacrificed everything in return for being dutiful to his parents, only to find his princess chilling with his parents, saying, you passed the test, now all of you can come live with me for eternity. Yay, resolution. But instead we got hit from left field by this concept of, you never considered the magical world you were living in experienced time differently, did you? And now everyone you've ever known is dead. What's interesting to me is Hollywood uses the effect of the 4-act structure in the sense that some of our greatest stories don't end where we think they're going to in Act 2. La La Land comes to mind. We thought this was a great love story in the making, only to realize it's actually a lesson about how you can have everything you dreamed of, but you can't predict who will be there to share it with you. Fight Club. Geez, Fight Club. If you went into that truly blind, the Act 3 and Act 4 part of the story would fry your brain. But it does feel like, in Hollywood, there's a knee-jerk reaction that if a story isn't going to end cleanly with the hero triumphing the way we want them to at the end, the quality of the story's execution has to be that much more incredible for us to not shun it for deviating from the 3-act happy ending structure. But what does this mean for protagonism, huh? At first glance, it kind of feels like this structure is a threat to the theories about building your own life, taking the pen back and writing a better script for yourself, doesn't it? I mean, it is clear that the roots of protagonism are deeply in the Western three-act story structure. But as I sifted through the different interpretations of the purpose and meaning behind the four-act structure of Kishōtenketsu, I found something actually very valuable for protagonism. Something that feels very authentically true about the human experience, because life is full of those Act 3 curveballs that uproot us from the path we think we're taking. We experience Act 3s that are less sensational than the story of Parasite or Urashima, but that doesn't make them any less disruptive to the story we thought we were telling. A high school athlete who was on track to sign a scholarship with a power conference school who gets hit by a drunk driver and is now paralyzed. The corporate lifer who never wanted anything more than a secure paycheck, who ends up getting laid off after 30 years of loyalty to the company. Or finding out that the love of your life, who you promised to be with until death, has been unfaithful. You are one thread in the universe, and that means there will be times that other threads seem to force their way into your life. New plot lines you never wanted and wish would just disappear. Most of us either have experienced this already or are destined to before long. A three-act story does a good job of saying, how will you overcome this to get back into your initial goal? But a four-act story lets us consider the answer to how will we salvage a story worth living when the Act 3 genre-bending tragedy literally makes our initial goal unachievable. In the broader scope of Kishōtenketsu, stories don't always end happily, and they definitely aren't designed to have tidy little resolutions like a three-act standard. But that fourth act is still up for the taking. Remember, it's about harmony. Act 3 pulls the rug from under you. Okay, how do you make sense of it? How do you incorporate that into your story? Because you can't rewind and remove it. It is now part of who you are. How do you make it part of the story you are telling? How can you find meaning in something that disrupted everything you knew about life? When we take the pen back and start rewriting our life story into one that we love, most of us will default to a three-act narrative. It's what we know. But understanding the value of a four-act story, to me, is being able to get hit with the asteroid in Act 3. Look at the ash and rubble around you that has obliterated the path you had been going down, and having the guts to say, I'm still holding the pen. The ending you initially were writing may be impossible now, but you still get to write the end of your story. When cancer strikes, when heartbreak comes out of nowhere, when the life you dreamed of is ripped from you, that is the universe waiting with bated breath to see how you find harmony in your fourth act. How can we take the shards of our Act 3 and find a way to observe the elements in our life, old and new, and find harmony and beauty in it all? We all love a good key show buildup. That's the same setup as we get in a three-act story. But when the 10 in Tenketsu hits you, do you have the guts to keep your grip on the pen and find a way to bring the unwanted tragedy of your Act 3 into the harmony of your greater story? Because that's when most people quit. When they realize the perfect dream they had is unattainable, they simply think, why even try now? The universe hates me. They spend the rest of their life hating the universe for what it did to them. Honestly, as I wrote this, Captain Ahab jumped into my head because he had envisioned himself becoming the greatest whale hunter on the seven seas. But when Moby Dick took his leg, he was unable to deal with his Act 3. And the harmony of his Act 4 in the book is that he loses himself completely because he can't let it go. But the mature protagonist never lets go of the pen and decides that they will find beauty in the madness. Your life may already be in a position where it can't possibly end the way you thought it would when you were young, but that doesn't mean it can't be a worthy story that you author yourself. When Act 3 chaos strikes your life, may you have the courage to stick it out for the salvaged beauty of Act 4. How do we feel now? Are you curious to explore story structures outside of what you've known your whole life? There are even more than just the 3 and 4 act stories, and I don't mean 5, 6, or 7 act. Another Asian framework covered in the book that I read is the circular format, which we see in movies like Groundhog Day or Edge of Tomorrow. I personally loved diving deeper into understanding Kishōtenketsu, because there are a number of ways that a 4-act story structure can play out. But what I love is that across the board, they all share this concept that we cannot control the chaos of Act 3. But Act 4 implies that we still have the chance to react. We still have some level of agency of how we respond to those Act 3 twists. If you like this episode, smash the follow button, give the show 5 stars on podcasting platforms, or give the video a like on YouTube. If you can think of other great examples of 4-act stories, leave me a comment. I'm Jameson Olson. You've been listening to Becoming the Main Character, and I'm already working on the next novel, so come back soon. For now, just keep your grip on the pen, my friends. No matter what life throws at you, there is a level of agency as long as you keep your grasp tight. We'll catch you on the next one.